it is now a primary domain controller on the test domain. We can now log in as our administrator account, and the Server Manager window will open. From here we can configure our domain services and add other roles and features onto our domain controller. At the very bottom of your Server Manager, you'll see that AD/DS has been installed, as well as DNS and File and Storage Services. In the next few lectures, you'll learn how to configure these services as well as add others. So now that our server is now a domain controller and we've installed Active Directory domain services, we now have to configure Active Directory. Well, what is Active Directory? It is the foundation of the Windows domain. It's essentially a catalog of all the registered objects in the domain, and it provides authentication services and security principles that allow those users and computers to access the resources that they've been granted permissions to. So we're going to start with a real-world scenario. We're going to provide some realistic examples of how Active Directory might be set up, and we're going to go through and actually configure it as if we were starting fresh for a real business. So we're going to be working with the imaginary CarMax dealership. It has one headquarter location and 2 sales locations. The headquarters has an administrative department, accounting, and HR, and then the 2 locations have sales staff, mechanic staff, and management. So we're going to go into Active Directory, set up these different objects, and go from there. So back in our server with the Server Manager window open, we'll go up into the top right hand corner to Tools. Then we'll click Active Directory Users and Computers to open that snap-in. On the left-hand side of ADUC, or Active Directory Users and Computers, you'll see our test.local domain. If we expand that, we'll see some of the built-in OUs, or organizational units, that come by default. Now when we're structuring Active Directory, my rule of thumb is always to start with the biggest organizational unit I can think of, and then work my way smaller. So with our example business, we want to start with the biggest division or biggest organizational structure unit that we can think of and then work smaller. So for our business, we'll start with our 3 locations. We've got a headquarters and 2 sales locations. So with our domain selected, we'll right-click in the middle of the screen, then click New Organizational Unit. And we'll give it a name. For instance, Headquarters. And we'll repeat that step for the other 2 locations. Now before I click New, I have the Headquarters OU selected. So right now I'm creating new objects within this OU. If I want to create an OU inside the root domain, I'll have to click that first. So I'll create 2 more organizational units, and we'll call our 2 sales locations CarMax East and CarMax West. From here, following our rule, we'll go to the next largest group of objects that we're going to put into Active Directory. Personally, I like to take each OU and separate them into users and computers, since that's going to be the most common object in our Active Directory structure. So for each location, I'm going to select it and create a new OU for computers. Make sure you name each one individually, so when you're looking at it on an individual basis, you know which one it is. So with this structure, I can put my users into headquarters and the computers at headquarters into the computers-headquarters OU. I'll repeat this for the next 2 organizational units. So now I have 3 OUs, our headquarters location, and our 2 sales locations, and a sub-OU for each one for the computers at that location. I'll put the users and the user groups in each location. So starting with headquarters, we want to create our next smallest item. Now here's where we can set up our departments for each location. Now when we're talking about departments, or small groups of users like that, we need to consider what kind of things those people are going to need to access. When we're talking about security principles like that, whether it's accessing a file share or access to a printer, we want to base that on a user basis and a group basis. Commonly in businesses, accounting and administrative people have access to different sets of resources. So in our headquarters location, we're going to set up a user group for each of our departments. In our headquarters group selected, we'll right-click and then create a new group. New group. We'll give the group a name. We'll make sure that the security group type is enabled, and we'll make sure that it is a global group. Then click OK. We'll repeat this step for the other two departments that we have at our headquarters location. Accounting, and HR. So now our headquarters location has a place for computers, a place for users, and separate groups of users that correspond to the different departments at that location. Now we also need to create our departments for our sales locations. Now keep in mind, within a domain you can't have two groups with the same name, even if they're in different organizational units. So it's best practice, like with our computers group that we have, or the computers OU under each location, to also append an individual or unique name to a group if it's specific to this OU. So we'll do sales at CM East. Make sure that it's a security group and a global group. And we'll repeat that for the other two. So now I have 3 user groups at that sales location, and since none of them have just the management, mechanics, or sales name, I can create the other 3 groups with CM West, so there's no conflicts. So now we have our basic Active Directory structure created. The only thing that we're missing is some users. So we'll put in some dummy users.